All right, here we go, dividing decimals. So making estimations for this one or figuring out a reasonable answer is going to be a little bit more difficult than in previous concepts, but I still think it's a good practice. So when we look at question number 1, I know that I'm trying to figure out how many 4/10ths are in 12. And I know that if this was 12, like how many 1/2s were in there, like that it would be 12 of them. And 4/10ths rather are significantly smaller than these 1/2s. So that means I'm going to be making smaller sized groups, so I'm going to have more of them, and quite a bit more, because if this was how many halves were in 12, then I would know that there's 24 halves. So this here can give me an idea that my answer is going to be probably in the ballpark of 24, maybe a little bit more, something that in that area. So let's see. 12 divided by 4/10ths, dividing by decimals can be a bit tricky, but I am pretty confident with dividing by fractions. So I'm going to rewrite this 4/10ths as a decimal, as 4/10ths as a fraction. So 12 divided by 4/10ths, and you know what, while I'm at it, I might as well write 12 as a fraction as well, because you know what, we do what we want. So we have 12 divided by 4/10ths, and this looks like a fraction divided by a fraction, so I can just multiply by the reciprocal. So 12 wholes times 10/4. Before I multiply, I'm going to simplify. I know I can divide this by 4 and get 1. 12 can be divided by 4, and that can get me 3. So I'm going to rewrite this. 3 over 1 times 10 over 1 as well. And that is going to equal 30. So looking at my reasonability up here, that seems to be quite reasonable, that there are 30 4/10ths in 12. Moving over here to question number 2, 32 divided by 8/10ths. Well, I know if this is 32 divided by 8, that would be 4. And this number here is 10 times less. And so I know that my groups are probably going to have to be 10 times greater, because if I have smaller groups, then I'm going to need more of them to take up that 32. So this is going to be 10 times greater. So my answer is probably going to be 40, actually. I may have just been able to reason my way to this one, but let's see if we can get there. Now, I'm going to try to do, tell you what, I'll do probably that same strategy again, because that seems pretty reasonable, pretty straightforward. So 32 wholes divided by 8/10ths. I can multiply by the reciprocal. I can simplify. 32 divided by 8 is 4. 8 divided by 8 is 1. I am left with 4 over 1 times 10 over 1, and that is 40. So I actually was able to reason my way through that. That's kind of fun. Awesome. Here on question number 3, we are into decimal divided by a decimal. So again, I'm thinking that this is how many 4/10ths are in 8/10ths. And so this one, I'm just going to do a quick number line. So if I start at 0, and I know that I'm going to try to get into 8/10ths, I'm figuring out how many 4/10ths. So if I skip 1 4/10th, that gets me on 4/10ths. And then if I do another 4/10ths, that would land me perfectly on there. So I know that there are two groups of 4/10ths and 8/10ths. Now, number lines can be a bit tricky for me, so I am going to look and see if I could do this using another strategy. So 8/10ths as a fraction is 8/10ths divided by 4/10ths. And now I have a fraction divided by a fraction, so you know what? I might as well multiply by the reciprocal. 8/10ths times 10/4. 10 and 10 can simplify to 1. 4 and 8 can simplify like that. So I'm left with 2 over 1 times 1 over 1, and that equals 2. So, feeling pretty good about that. Now, I seem to have skipped this blue, but if I think about my question here, my brain will tell me that 2 seems to be the most reasonable answer. So now that I'm looking at number 4, It seems like this one, if this was how many 2/10 are in one whole, I know one broken into 2/10, there would be 5 of them. Because if I skip count by 2/10, I know 2/10, 4/10, 8, 6/10, 8/10, 10/10, or one whole would be 5 of them. So I know my answer is going to be somewhere near 5, and I'm going to use the fraction strategy for this one. And then we'll probably check with the number line just to see. So 9/10 divided by 2/10. And notice I am writing that out every single time. I just don't want to accidentally skip a step and then end up multiplying by 2/10, thinking that I've done the reciprocal when I haven't yet. So take that extra moment, rewrite it, and then multiply by the reciprocal. So these will simplify to 1. And then 9 and 2, they don't simplify very nicely at all. So I'm just going to multiply straight across. So I know this is going to be 9/1 times a half. And that will equal 9/2. And in there, I know that's 8/2 and 1/2. And 8 over 2 is the same as 4. So this equals 4.5. And that is pretty close to my estimation of 5. Now, granted, this is a decimal lesson, so I should probably leave this as a decimal. So 4.5. Now, I'm wondering how this would look on a number line. So again, we're starting at 0. Our goal is to land on 9/10, but we're skip counting by 2/10. So I know if I skip count here, this is 2/10, 4/10, 6/10, 8/10. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I only have 1/10 remaining. And so I know that in here, if I'm doing groups or jumps or skips of 2/10, I actually need to do just a half of a jump because I only needed to jump 1/10. And 1/10 of the 2/10 that I needed is equal to a half. So our fractions match our number line, and that seems to be pretty reasonable with our estimation. So pick a question from above and solve using another strategy. I seem to have already done that for 3 and 4, but you know what? I might as well. Let's see, do it again. I think for this one, question number 1, I feel like I did too much work there. And I'm going to try to use place value language for number 1. So really, 12 divided by 4/10, we know 4/10 as a decimal is the same as 4/10 as a fraction, which is the same as 4/10 using place value language, where this tenths is almost like our unit. So if we have 12 divided by 4/10, I know 12 divided by 4 equals 3. That seems to be a little bit wonky, because 3/10, that wouldn't make much sense. So, Mr. Plasko, what did you do here? Seems to be problematic. Maybe place value language doesn't work out very well on this one. You know, I went down a path that I thought was going to be clever, and it turns out no good. So let's just look at this one with a number line, just to check ourselves. Now, number lines aren't going to be particularly useful for every single problem, but in this case, because I know 12 and 4 are pretty related, it seems like it's going to be quite useful. It will at least work. So I know if I jump forward once, that's going to get me to 4/10. This is going to be 8/10. And then this is going to be interesting, 12/10. And so here, I'm going to pause for a moment because I know that if I'm at 1 and 2/10, or 12/10, and that was 3 groups. So 3 groups of 4/10 equaled 1 and 2/10. And I'm trying to figure out how many groups of 4/10 equals 12. Well, I know 1 and 2/10 times 10 is going to get me to 12. So I must need 10 times as many groups. So 30 of them. Now I'm going to keep skip counting. I'm not going to write it down because that's going to get tiring, but here we go. 1.4, 1.6, 1. Oh, that's wrong. Okay, 1. Let me rewind a minute. Come on. This is why you shouldn't rush. How about 1 and 6/10? 2, 2 and 4/10, 2 and 8 tenths, 3 and 2 tenths. Now, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm not going to continue with this. I'm just going to trust the math and know that I have sound reasoning and that my answer is going to be 30. And you know what? It does match my answer up there.